Let the word go
The
forth.
challenge, the opportunity to connect. The 1960s, a time of imagination and change, a time of anger and fear. The 1960s, a pioneering program called Challenge.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen.
That looked at our connections, our divisions, through the lens of shared values.
For something real.
60 years later, we examine our divisions, our connections, our shared pains and successes in a new program called Challenge 2.0. Although the 17-month war between Hamas and Israel paused in January, the ceasefire has expired. The sense of disconnect and distrust, already high, have endangered the likelihood of an extension. One cause of that distrust, recent proposals to evict Palestinians from Gaza and transform it into a high-end resort. In this episode of Challenge 2.0, we speak with two Seattle residents familiar with the region, Mercy Corps founder Dan O'Neill, who once lived on an Israeli kibbutz, and surgical nurse Christie Jucht, who has regularly volunteered in hospitals located in Gaza. This conversation is the focus of our latest episode of Challenge 2.0. What happens in Gaza won't remain in Gaza. So we're very fortunate for this conversation to have two guests who have deep awareness and familiarity with the Middle East, with the areas that we're going to be talking about. Christie Jucht, a surgical nurse who has spent a lot of time volunteering over there. Christie, thank you for joining us this morning as we tape this. And Dan O'Neill, the founder of Mercy Corps, and you've spent a lot of time over there. So what I'd like to do is just begin with you giving us a sense of how you came to go to the Middle East and what was the nature of your work there, your experiences there. Dan, maybe we might start with you.
Sure. In my case, I had been studying in Switzerland for a period of time. It was basically a faith-based sort of theology kind of curriculum, and I spent 3 months there. Part of the layout of what the expectation was is that we would go, all the students from Lausanne, Switzerland, would go on what we called the Middle East field trip, and I was one of the leaders. We took 90 students from Switzerland. I was one of the lead drivers, and we literally drove from Switzerland to Jerusalem and ended up on the Sea of Galilee. So I was there as just part of a study program, but once I got a taste of the Middle East, I really started being drawn more into it. And so at the end of that trip that I just mentioned, I just left the group. I had a friendly parting of ways, and I walked on to a kibbutz I'd never known about, didn't know the name of it, just saw that it was there, and said, can I be a volunteer? And so, they said they'll pay me $12 a week, 6 days a week, get up at 3 in the morning, get on your tractor, fuel it up, and go work in the orchards. So it was just sort of being dunked kind of cold turkey into the Sea of Galilee area, and part of that was the west coast of that lake. It's actually a lake called Kinneret. But that led to a deeper kind of fascination with the language, the studies, where did the church come from, where did Islam come from, what about Judaism, and I just fell into my own kind of self-activated study program that I'm still studying. So it's lasted for a long, long time.
And of course, with Mercy Corps, you were doing a lot of work over in that area as well.
Yes, and that was, years and years later. And we had programs. We had an office, still have an office on the Mount of Olives. And that office deals with work in the West Bank and Gaza, as well as other areas of the region.
And Christie, of course, you're trained as a surgical nurse. When did you first get that sense of, this is a place I need to go and help in?
I actually didn't know much about what was going on in Gaza, but I was invited by a Seattle-based pediatric surgeon who was affiliated with a charity called PCRF, Palestinian Children's Relief Fund. And she had been going for several years, and I worked with her closely in Seattle, and she invited me along, and so I got the opportunity to go. I had been passionate about doing mission trips. I had been to Guatemala and the Dominican and India, so I thought this was a great opportunity to go to the Middle East with the group and do something good.
When the attack by Hamas on Israel occurred in October of 2023, and then there was the retaliatory strikes on a very broad scale back in Gaza after that. I might just ask you, what was your initial reaction, and how has that evolved as we've seen the events evolve?
Well, when I went over the first time in 2016, I got a first-hand view of the conditions in Gaza, and a real sense of the Israeli occupation and the military enclave over there. 2016, it had already suffered, decades of occupation, two intifadas. There was mass destruction there before October 7th. There was limited building supplies, food, water, electricity, roads couldn't be rebuilt. So there was already mass destruction. So when I heard of it, my heart just sank, because I just couldn't imagine how, further bombardment of the area, how the people there could even sustain it for a week, let alone, a year and a half later. I was gutted. I just couldn't believe it.
And the people that you've made, roughly how many trips have you made over there?
I've been there 5 times now.
Okay.
And my last trip was February of 23.
And you get correspondence from friends, professional colleagues that you've made over there throughout this period, and continue to get those?
Yes, I talk to them weekly. We are in a group text. So, throughout the whole thing, you could just see all the emotions they were going through, from initially anger, like they felt very let down by, America. We were helping fund the war. They felt, how are they going to survive this? So they had no way of, communicating that with the world, so it came to us, their friends, and I was devastated. I was apologetic, and then I just realized I had to let them vent, that they were grieving terribly, and then finding ways how I could support them.
Dan, what was your reaction, both initially, and has that modified, changed any in the intervening months?
My initial reaction was one of shock that the IDF didn't have a tighter means of defense around northern Gaza. And having lived on kibbutzim and knowing how open the fields are, and how open the civilian population is, it was almost like they baited Hamas to come in, and Hamas planned for a long time to do exactly what they did. But my first thought was, well, then the IDF is going to use this and hammer them as hard as they can, which is what the IDF does. They don't mess around. They go in and take care of, knock them down and bag them up, as they used to say in the Vietnam jungles. But I then started thinking about, what about the other borders, and what's going to happen in southern Lebanon? And then I started thinking, well, now how's Jordan going to react? Because 65% of Jordan are Palestinians. So I started kind of seeing what the dominoes were going to, what the end game would be. We don't know exactly yet.
Right.
But there was a series of very predictable dominoes going down that did happen.
Do you see from, and I know both of you are avid observers on what's going on, and you have your contacts, what do you see as the general sense among Israeli citizens and among Gazans in terms of either their support for the Netanyahu government or their support for Hamas?
I feel initially the Israelis stood behind Netanyahu, but over time I think they started to see that he had other intentions of just getting the hostages back. So I think there was a little bit of shift, but and then on the Palestinian side, my friends would always say Hamas is bad, they're not good, we don't support them. But over time, I think they saw them as kind of defenders of their land. Like if they didn't do something, the outcome was not going to be good for them. So while they don't propose that war and fighting is good and the taking of the hostages, I feel like that's their only voice and hope right now.
Dan, how about your take on that?
There was a kind of a wave of support for Netanyahu and for the IDF more than even Netanyahu. to take care of business. But it seems to have created both dissent against, Israeli dissent against the Netanyahu regime, but also strong support for Netanyahu. So it's polarized the Israeli public, in my view.
Of course, now we're sort of, as we tape this, and we know that events are changing rapidly over there, we're sort of in between ceasefires. There's one stage that ended. We're sort of waiting to see what is going to replace that. And we're beginning to look at what comes next. What's the ultimate shape of Gaza? What is its future? And I believe it was on February 25th, there was an artificial intelligence generated video that came out designed around President Trump's concept on this. And what I'd like to do right now is just pause for a moment and share that video with our viewers. Let's just take a look at that.
Donald is coming to set you free, bringing the light for all to see. No more tunnels, no more fear. Trump Gaza is finally here. Trump Gaza shining bright, golden future, a brand new light. Feast and dance, the deal is done. Trump Gaza, #1. Trump Gaza, shining bright. Golden future, a brand new light. Feast and dance, the deal is done. Trump Gaza, #1.
So having seen that, especially the first time, what was your reaction? Christie, I might ask you first.
Yeah, I mean, when I first saw it, it was just ludicrous. I thought it was actually a joke, just a satire. Like I said, almost like a Saturday Night Live skit. Like, let's see how preposterous we can make this. Yeah, I was in disbelief.
Yeah, I was shocked. I immediately recognized the scriptural reference to it. Daniel chapter 3 and Nebuchadnezzar and his construction of this enormous gold figure. I mean, it's all about idolatry and judgment. It's the exact opposite message that anyone would want to propagate, especially to a large audience that's, various political and religious affiliations. But it was just absurd in my view, and inflammatory on top of it.
Well, that would be where I'd go next, or ask you to go next, and that is, we talked about our visceral reaction when we first saw that. What impact do you have the sense that this has had on Gazans, Palestinians, on Israelis, on the larger Middle East community that is looking to deal with all of this?
I would say that what it showed me is that, and what it showed the Gazans, especially, is that the West doesn't understand the concept of al-Nakba. And as you may know, al-Nakba is the Arabic term for catastrophe, or the catastrophe, which happened in 1948 when the Palestinians were herded out of their land and people became refugees. And so on both sides there's this connection to the land. And people in the West don't understand it that much. But that's why Gazans were appalled at the idea that Trump would say, we need to get everybody out of Gaza. We need to get the Palestinians out and rebuild. And then if they want to come back, they can. So I think that it deserves more empathy and even maybe research about what happened in 1948 and then the various wars over time. There's this, it all traces its roots of bitterness and explosive violence back to 1948. The Jewish people coming out of their Holocaust nightmare wanted a piece of land they could call their own. And so there was the generation over time of Zionism as a political entity with ambitions for geography. And that they were going to make darn sure that they didn't let anything like that, quote, happen again, ever. But at the expense, therefore, of the Palestinians, who were literally living in peace side by side with Jews for many decades, probably hundreds of years. They worked together in their farms and socialized, but there just became this bitter experience of Israel becoming what would apparently be a colonial operation through Zionism, and then the Palestinians being the victim of it. But both sides suffered the horrors that neither side should have. But now we find them clashing and people dying.
Christie, I want your take on this. What have you heard from people in terms of that are in Gaza or in the surrounding areas that you typically have gone in to offer aid to? What was their reaction when they heard this? Because I've got to believe that this, with social media, spread like wildfire over the Middle East too.
Yeah, I mean, I think they think it's preposterous. They're not going to leave. So even though Trump is proposing that they leave, they rebuild it, and then the option to return, they know from 1948, you know, last time when they were chased off their land, there is no right of return. And that has created years of hostility. And the idea that the Palestinians will leave, they're going to rebuild it and make it better than it was before, and then everybody's going to live happily ever after. I think they're like, no chance, you know, we're not leaving. So I think they're waiting from the surrounding countries to help rebuild. And that for them, that's the only plan. They won't leave.
As the video showed, I mean, you had a picture of bare-chested President Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu, and then Elon Musk tossing money in the air, and belly dancers. I mean, given the sensibilities of those countries, what impact do those images alone have on them? Any thoughts on that?
The word absurd comes to mind, you know, almost unbelievable.
I tried to watch it over and over again and dissect it. I didn't even understand like these little Trump statues that almost look like awards, like that they were lined up in gift shops, and the belly dancers were bearded. I didn't even know it was a mockery.
Yeah.
I thought it was almost sacrilegious, like idols. And I mean, the Israelis would not see fondly of that, nor were the Muslims or Christianity. Like, I don't know who that was trying to appeal to, this whole Riviera. It didn't make any...
Equal opportunity insults.
It just didn't make any sense. That's why I said I really thought it was a spoof, a satire.
You described a little bit about the forced deportation, the evacuation of Gazans, Palestinians out of Gaza. Christie, what have you heard from some of your colleagues over there when they first heard this? Not so much just the video, but the idea that, well, we'll just simply move them out of the way and make a resort out of it.
I think they always say that was always part of Israel's plan, is to get them off the land and take it. This whole, you know, colonization, the Zion movement. And then I think, you know, it's almost contradicts itself. They were told for, you know, the first part of the war that there wasn't any destruction happening and that Gaza was a thriving city. And so there were these AI-generated images of people on the high street shopping, and that there's no, you know, scarcity of food, you know, and they were shutting down their internet. Now they're showing these images saying it's a complete wasteland, there's nothing there, there's nowhere to survive, you must leave. So I think they're saying, you know, which is it? You know, one minute you're telling us that we're making it up and, you know, that Gaza's a thriving area and we want to have pity on them. And now he's, you know, on the other side saying, we've left it a complete wasteland. It's unlivable. And so there's...
Now, you've been there. Which is closer to the
It's
your
unlivable.
perception?
It was, you know, there were still areas that were functioning, but I couldn't believe the destruction. And one of the nurses from Canada that I traveled with said that she had been to Gaza on her honeymoon prior to the occupation, and it was a beautiful, you know, beachfront, you know, city where you could stay and vacation. And then when the wall went up and restrictions were there, she cried when she went the first time. She said, this looks nothing like it did decades ago. And I couldn't believe how little had been rebuilt since previous bombings.
I think, and we'd had a prior conversation, I think, give us a sense of scale. Is it my understanding Gaza, at least in terms of geographic extent, is roughly the size of a reference that might be familiar to people here in Western Washington? Is it like Mercer Island? Is it like Whidbey Island in size?
Yeah, I mean, it's about twice the size of Mercer Island, so it's very long and narrow. Last I looked, Mercer Island had 25,000 inhabitants, and Gaza has, 2.2 million. So in the space, twice the size of Mercer Island. And then when they were being evacuated and telling to go to the south, now you have all these people in the size of Mercer Island, and they're relentlessly dropping large-scale bombs. I mean, you can only imagine what the destruction would be and the death toll. And they were saying like, oh, we're precisely dropping and targeting Hamas. It's impossible. Yeah. There's no way.
Dan, what have you heard in terms of the response of people in the Middle East and your contacts over there in terms of their response, and what impact does that have in terms of the credibility of our country over in that region?
Well, among Arab countries and predominantly Muslim populations, there's already this, sense of bitterness toward the West, toward the U.S. in particular, because of what Christie said. We have been heavily arming the IDF, and we know that they've dropped huge bombs, bunker-busting bombs, 2,000-pound bombs and 500-pound bombs. And those aren't usually precision-guided. It's approximate, so you wipe out your target is moved from one house or one apartment or one building to a city block. So the massive destruction, I think, has pretty much alienated many people in the Middle East against the U.S. and what our motives really are. And then, of course, the countries around that simmering frying pan of violence are looking over their shoulder, and then their borders are being violated, and then movements like in Syria recently are springing up. And if there's an empty hole, it seems to be being filled with violence.
As we look not only at the impact on America's credibility in that area, and we look at the impact of this generated proposal to redevelop that area into some sort of beach resort, I have to think of the fact that this has been, as you both described, turned into largely a wasteland. They have estimates of how many people have died, but are there not many people trapped below that maybe will never be recovered? What would be the perception of simply building something on top of what I guess in one sense could be viewed as a cemetery?
That subject has actually been discussed in network news. It's one of the sort of overarching concerns of Gazans in particular, that their people are going to be part of a concrete, new city, or it's a desecration. Let's put it that way. I heard one guy say, who was familiar with construction, that there's no amount of construction material or equipment that could ever clean up the current mess that's there now. It would be Herculean. It would have to be a whole new project to try to build a city out of nothing. And Gaza, since you were there, it doesn't have wide open spaces. It is like a super smashed up, city with some suburbs, but a lot of construction that ended up coming down. And with the frenetic pace of the war, there was no time for people to go in and start retrieving the thousands that are probably under the dust of the wreckage of what was Gaza.
Christie, what's your sense of that issue, building on top of what may be unrecoverable bodies?
Yeah, it's horrifying. I mean, you're essentially going in and moving a graveyard to build on top of it. And again, you're talking about bombs that are 2,000 pounds, 500 pounds. When you drop that on a densely populated area, I mean, they're showing visions of the deceased. Maybe like sometimes you'll see an arm outside of the rubble. But I have images that have been sent to me. Again, people I know because they're upset and angry, and they're collecting body parts. They're literally collecting their child's head, and an arm and a mandible, and they are sometimes bringing them together in large areas where mothers, fathers, and children are digging through the body parts, which just is horrifying images, again, of like the Holocaust and piles of bones. And they still have tissue on them, and it's so horrifying. I say, this is not a movie. This is real. And they're saying there's 3 times as many. They're saying 60,000. They're saying easily 180, because the Ministry of Health and Israel will not accept that someone has passed or died unless they have the dental records. And they say nobody has the dental records.
Right.
So they're just not even acknowledging it. So if you bring me that body part, they're like, it's nothing. It's nothing to me. So they're saying it's more than that. You had people sheltering in churches and mosques and buildings and hospitals, and then you're dropping a bomb on them. I don't know where people think that goes. I mean, can't imagine.
Well, we don't want to imagine, but I think one of the questions that comes out of this is, where do we go? We talked about one plan that was basically released on social media, but there are some other plans out there, and I'd like to get more of your sense of not only the implications for this domestically and local. So I thank you for joining us for this conversation, and we hope that you'll stick with us and join us again next week, where we continue this discussion. I know it's difficult to listen to, but I think it's important for us as we look to move forward and perhaps develop a more constructive relationship over there. So again, thank you for joining us on this edition of Challenge 2.0, and hope you'll join us again next week. Thank you.